When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello, and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry, with me, Musicalize's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. And usually this bit's done by the guy who's got decades of professional radio experience, but Steve is away in South by Southwest at the moment, so I'm flying solo this week. Well, not entirely solo. This is an interview, so I'm going to be talking to Matt Griffiths, who is the CEO of Youth Music, which is the charity that funds a lot of the exciting projects around the country dealing with kind of young people and music in all its forms. So I'm going to talk to him now. Welcome, Matt, to The Price of Music.
Thank you, Stuart. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. I mean, we've talked about quite a few of your announcements in the past year, but this feels like a really good time to actually talk to you in more depth, because we talked on the show last week, I talked about being at the Brit Awards and seeing Ezra Collective collect their award, which is a really big moment, and shouting out Tomorrow's Warriors, which is the kind of group they got started. And I think that wonderful phrase that we can fix society's problems by giving a young person a trumpet or a saxophone. And that was like a big positive moment. And then the next day, I think it was Sophie who handles who does comms with you guys. Anyway, she was saying that your research shows 41% of those projects are at risk of closure. So I sort of thought, this is a time to talk about this. Like at this moment when these projects seem really valuable and important, but they're facing these huge challenges. And I think you know about both those things. And who better person?
Well, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to chat about it. And yeah, the grassroots youth music's projects are in a state of crisis, to be honest. And we're supporting about 350 organisations across the UK. In addition, we're reaching 250 young creatives directly who are beginning to make their career in music. So in total, it's about 100,000 young people going through a system that's powered by youth music. So, you talked about Ezra Collective, Kinetica Blocko, Tomorrow's Warriors, Audioactive, where they learnt their craft, where Ezra learnt their craft, are all spaces powered and supported by youth music. And then indeed, English Teacher as well. They came out of a program called Music Leads, which is backed by youth music as well. So on one hand, there's this infrastructure that's pretty significant, but it often gets forgotten about in terms of where funding and resources go. And what we've got at the moment is a situation, we surveyed them all in January, and 41% said yes, at risk of closure, which is unprecedented for us. And then at the same time, what we see as a funder is an unprecedented demand for our support. So we're seeing that we're having to turn down 83% of applications. So in this crisis, demand for our support is increasing. And at the same time, because of cost of living crisis, because of employers' costs, I think because of the economy, and also a lot of these organisations we support are pretty small. They're sort of 2-3 person social enterprises, maybe £200,000-300,000 turnover. And what tends to happen is there's been really rigorous and harsh funding cuts, particularly with youth services and particularly with local authority cuts. And many of the organisations we support have seen their funding cut. So as a small organisation, if a piece of the pie goes, they're suddenly in a really vulnerable position.
No, definitely. Well, look, we're going to get into a lot of this, but I suppose one place to start or to zoom back out again is to talk about what youth music is. And I guess you've just sort of explained the fact that a lot of the projects you support do have funding from different places. So you're not the total fund of these things, you're part of it. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about how long have you been going and where does the money come from to fund the work you're doing? And then we can go from there.
Okay, so we started in 1999, and the wonderful Chris Smith, who was Culture Secretary at the time, and Jerry Robinson, who was Chair of Arts Council, had this idea that basically music's amazing, an amazing thing for young people, but all too often so many young people are losing out. So let's set up a new charity to really look at that, and that's us. That's Youth Music, which is really all about equity, inclusion, and social change through music, really. And that's our heritage, 25 years. And we're about equalising access to music, and we help marginalised young people make and monetize music. And how we do that primarily is by giving out grants, lots of different funding programs to provide a sustainable ecosystem for young people to make music in the UK. And it's the place like the youth club, like the community recording studio. It's like the early years setting for very young children with their parents. And then it's like the special school, the mental health unit, the youth offending institution, anywhere that we know music can make a particular difference. And how we're supported. In 1999, we became the first delegated distributor of National Lottery money via Arts Council England, which is a designation, Stuart, that 25, close to 26 years later, we still have.
Wow.
And that's our sort of absolute bedrock. And then in terms of other income, People's Postcode Lottery, music industry partners, brand partners, some other foundations, makes a total turnover around 12.5 million a year. And we give out through the door, get out the door, 10 million of that each year.
Goodness. And I mean, you've sort of talked a bit about the sort of things you put there, but I mean, I think what struck me when I came to your awards a couple of times, when I've seen your work, what struck me is it's a huge variety, isn't it, of projects and groups you work with in terms of size, what they do. I mean, it's hard to describe them all because there's so many, but like so it's kind of, it's anyone who's working with young people, like you say, in a musical context, but that can be hugely wide, can't it?
Exactly. So my last project visit, I went to see Sound Communities in Paignton in the southwest, the English Riviera, where there's a classic youth setup for music called Sound Communities, working with young rappers, producers, DJs in a studio on a regular basis. It might be work with refugees and asylum seekers, Fair Beats, Big Leaf Foundation. It's work with disabled young people, some incredible work by an organisation called Soundabout that's working with young children with profound and multiple disabilities and how music really helps them. Open Up Music, similarly, using assistive music technology where disabled young people are making music through the movement of their eyes. Eye gaze technology. So it is a really varied and diverse scene. And also, therefore, the music being created is amazing. It's an amazing scene of different types of music. But the thread is around this argument about social justice. Who gets to have access to music and who doesn't? And we're really there to address those who face the biggest barriers to access. So it's anything from early years, 0 to 5s, right the way through to what you would have seen at the awards, the kind of 18 to 25 bracket, those young creatives on and off stage, starting to make a career in music.
And it's one of the things we've talked about when we talk about venues, actually, is it can be easy to sort of look at the big successes. Like, say, for example, look at Ezra Collective and say, look, this thing, this organization, this network creates the next stars. And that's an important part of it. But it is really interesting to me to learn more about, actually, it's not just about that. It is about the social effects, the community effects. It's not just about this thing creates the stars of tomorrow. It's about the people who are not the stars of tomorrow, but have benefited hugely. Like it's a thing I've learned, I think, to not just talk about in those contexts, I suppose.
And that's absolutely right. And that's fundamental. The social and personal outcomes that a young person gets from making and learning and earning in music, as we know, and the evidence tells us, is extraordinary. And it builds scenes, it builds communities, it builds places where young people can go and feel safe. And they can explore their identity. They can express themselves through lyric writing. And I guess, boy, do we need those safe environments at this present time, not just in the UK, but in the world. So I think what really gets me up in the morning as much as anything is the social and personal benefit. That might be around how music helps solve an issue for you, that might be to do with attendance in school, or how music is a way that really gets you into school, or it might be because of a mental health challenge. And one way that you can express that is through music. And in the early years space, it might be about, the very beginnings of your life, when your brain is developing so quickly that you're developing language skills and things like that. So the social and personal is what really drives me. If out of that, Stuart, you then get, which we see a lot, people who then establish a career in music and make a job in music, that's even better. But that's not the fundamental reason why we exist. That's like an added benefit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think you talked about the idea of opening music access to people who maybe wouldn't have access to studios or instruments. That seems like a really important part of that, because, like you said, the diversity is what brings forward great music. People who are great musicians, but maybe didn't have access to a trumpet or a space or whatever it is.
Right. The greater diversity, the greater the music. I firmly believe that. You can write a banger tune with some really amazing lyrics that audiences and young people really understand, and it builds this community, it builds these scenes. So I think it's a really sort of positive byproduct of the social and personal aspects.
No, definitely. So, I mean, given all this, and I think obviously when it was set up, politicians were saying we can see why this is a good thing and why we should have it. So you talked about some of the reasons, some of the challenges they're facing, and it sounds from the outside like a perfect storm. It's no one thing that's harming them. It's all these different things coming together at once. Is that a fair summary?
It is a bit of a perfect storm, the financial and the economic and the social and the kind of unfairness bit. But I also think for us, we're powering this ecosystem. We have been for a long time, and it's often the kind of forgotten bit of the ecosystem. Where do these young people go where they can make music? And often it's in these places. And it often, might be in their school music department as well, but that's also under pressure, which adds to the perfect storm. Music should be Key Stage 1, 2 and 3 in the national curriculum. It's statutory, but it's not really being enforced. So that adds to the combination of factors that's going on, really. And in a way, this is what the crisis is, and this is what the risk is for social growth of the UK, as well as economic growth. And that's what we're really interested in addressing. And for us, the demand for this type of work has increased because I think it's really recognized the power of it. But the demand has also increased in terms of applications to youth music because it's really, really tough. And the pots of money for this type of music activity is very hard to come by.
And I'm not really a massive expert on the world of kind of arts funding, but I've picked up outside music as well that there does seem to be these really brutal cuts that have meant that people who are losing funding, it's not because they haven't been doing well or doing good work or successful. It just seems to be sometimes the hammer has fallen on the funding and they can't get it. I mean, it seems like a really tough time in that sense, and it's not based on what you're doing or whether you're good at it. It just seems to be
Precisely. And the arts and culture system, one of the main players in that is Arts Council England, and in fairness to them, they're seeing similar levels of unprecedented demand. But there is a point to be made about the funding that does exist, where it goes. So we take an incredibly targeted approach to reach those that face the biggest barriers to access. And that kind of recognizes that for some in society who maybe already have the opportunity, the subsidy doesn't have to necessarily go there because they'll be okay. And in fact, some aspects of the music industry could be argued as become increasingly about privilege. Sam Fender wrote about this recently, rather than actually being from a diversity of backgrounds, including working class backgrounds. So that discourse and debate continues. And I think for us, it's like being confident about taking that targeted approach, being confident also to take a geographic approach. So 85% of our investment is deliberately outside London. So we have a regional balancing process for the regions and the nations in UK, which informs, based on indices of deprivation and things like that, where we place our money. So I think there's things that you can do to make the money that you have go far. But actually, our 10 million really long term to meet the demand should be 40 million.
Goodness. And it's one of the, I mean, there's many good reasons why I'm not a politician. There's a whole podcast in that probably about why I'd be unsuited to any of that. But one of the things that when I step back and look at this, I think, goodness, okay, I've read enough about the power of these programs, power of music to say, right, it's a really good thing. Whether it's, if you're worried about crime, if you're worried about job prospects,
right,
all these things people worry about, this can help. And it seems so short-sighted when these programs are arbitrarily cut or not supported, or even in schools where music education gets sort of chucked out the curriculum. But I mean, is that because it's too easy to kind of think, oh, it's just music, it's not that important? Or why is music often the thing that suffers, I guess, in these kind of cuts?
I think it's a bit of that, oh, this isn't so important compared to other things. And I think it's a little bit for me, Stuart, about the role of musician in society. You know, I was a musician originally. I was a drummer, a percussionist, and people would go, it must be so amazing to do something that you love. And of course it is. And I got by. But then there's a sort of assertion that because you love it so much, you don't need to be able to make your living somehow. It's because you're doing a job that everyone would love to do. And that's partly true, but it requires those youth workers. It requires those music teachers, everything Femi talked about, which is the ecosystem where all these young people really thrive. So the workforce is really, really important to it. So I think it's about something about the position of the artist and musician in society, that it needs nurturing, it needs backing to feed this wonderful industry that we have for years to come and on a very sustainable basis.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was going to ask the other brutally simple question. We're going to get onto what you're doing in a minute in your announcement this week. But is this something that could be solved simply by the government saying, here's a big wad of cash, have at it? Or is it more complicated that in terms of thinking what could be done to alleviate this crisis, but then to build, I suppose?
So would a big wad of cash help from government? Yes, of course. But like with a pragmatic head on, things are really tight. And I think this current government, who in a way really understand this work, they need to do some policy work on it, but they do understand it. I think they're looking to the industry in the widest sense to coalesce together around music and young people in this country and strategically work together. So it's much more joined up about how young people get into music on and off stage. And I think the government are also looking to, certain aspects of the industry that's wealthy to put some money behind it, rather than a small project that maybe doesn't last long, but it gets a bit of, sparkly PR. It's actually about a sustainable investment where the labels, the DSPs literally put competition outside the door and coalesce around young people in music. I believe that if that happens, then the government will be interested. But I don't think it's a question of going to government at the moment and just saying, give us some cash, because there is cash in the system, but how it's distributed is probably the thing that we can do better at, and in some ways is quite unfair. There's a kind of irony that the charity system for music and young people, which, youth music is right at the heart of, is almost the place where talent and creativity and young artists are emerging. But in the meantime, the commercial aspects of the music industry, there are things happening, don't get me wrong, but it's not as ambitious as it should be. The number of young people we see coming out and going out to work on stage or off stage, that's to the industry's benefit. And they're going, thank you very much. And I'm going, that's fine. But it shouldn't just be up to the charity sector to be these places where this pathway for young people is created. Mm-hmm. So I suppose what I'm saying is industry get it right first, the national music strategy, and I think that's what the government are almost insisting the industry does. And yes, there's been the conversations about the levy, etc., but I think that's what the government's looking for, because we are talking to a more open door, I think, with this government, who, who are part of the heritage of starting youth music in 1999. But I think they get so many requests or lobbying for give us a pot of money, and another organisation says no, give us a pot of money. And it's like, come on, everybody, let's get joined up about this. Yeah. And then, that's the idea of this kind of, national music strategy. Does that make sense?
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more, or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Hey, it's Haley Steinfeld. When everything requires your attention, it can be tough to figure out what to prioritize. But I'm here to talk to you about something that you should always put first: your breast health. In fact, if you're 40 and over, you should be getting screened once a year. And if you're under 40, it's never too soon to visit yourattentionplease.com to learn about your breast cancer risk. So go on, pay the girls some attention and take the time to find out your breast cancer risk at yourattentionplease.com. Trust me, your future self will thank you.
It does. And I was wondering if there's a moment happening now, because like you alluded to the levy. I mean, I talked to Mark David of the Music Venue Trust recently, and he was talking about, our next fundraising campaign, we're going to be going around all the big music companies, all the streaming services, and saying, look, you need grassroots venues to survive. And he seemed quite optimistic that message would get across, because I think maybe people are waking up to it and saying, even though I'm a label, I still have an investment in there being small venues that survive. And similar with this, with youth, like maybe in the past, perhaps music industry didn't think about, well, what has 3 to 5 year olds doing music got to do with me? But do you have a sense that maybe that you're going to push an open door with the industry in that, and saying, actually, they may realize now the grassroots in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of projects and youth things? Do you sense a change in the wind?
And that's where my optimism comes in. Yes, I do. I think it's that thing where maybe in the past it's been, that's great, Matt, it's not my problem, or it's not our core purpose. You do that, we do this. But I think that's changing. And what we're seeing and hearing from is, if you like, change makers, people who genuinely and passionately get the power of music and want to do something about it, and their day job could well be working in, a significant music industry body, or, a service, or whatever it might be. So I think these group of change makers are the very people who can drive and affect change. And then the economic argument, I think, has been made, what it means to the economy. But I think what we can make more of is like the social economy for music, and the scenes that are created across the UK that is great for music as well. So yeah, I would share that optimism, but we've just got to get organised in a music industry system that is sometimes so competitive, which can lead to real fragmentation. And my call is, we'll put that outside the door a minute, and let's coalesce together around music and young people, a bit like some aspects of the sports sector have done and the football sector's done. It's clearer. The system is clearer for a young person, and I think we can do that.
Yeah, and like you say, there's that example out there to say, look, it can be done. Someone has done it.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking the day before you launch your most ambitious fundraising campaign yet, and this will go out after it. And so, yeah, I mean, tell me about that, because that feels for you like an exciting moment of, right, here's what we're doing. So yeah, what are you doing? How's it going to work? What's the big news this week?
Yeah, an exciting moment and a much needed moment. And we're calling it Rescue the Roots, which is a fundraising campaign shining a spotlight on this like really important aspect of the ecosystem and then raising more money to back it. So in the first phase, Youth Music ourselves, we're putting up £1 million to match every donation that comes in up to £1 million. So we could have a pot of £2 million, which we will distribute in 2025 to those organisations that we know are particularly vulnerable and at risk that's been reported in the research. And that could be philanthropists, foundations, industry partners, public donations, etc., etc. And of course, artists as well, who artists often do really recognise the need for this because they've been through it themselves. So in total, a 2 million campaign. And yeah, that's what's being launched this week. And the important bit is that Youth Music is putting its money where its mouth is. You know, Youth Music and its board, my board, have said we'll put £1 million from our reserves behind it to match these donations. So, Stuart, that's phase one for us, rescue the roots. And then in a way, over time, with everything I've just talked about, kind of restore and grow the roots where we can begin to grow this ecosystem more and meet this demand. So success rates for applicants to Youth Music go up. The organisations at risk of closure go down. And then we could get to a point where the 10 million becomes more over time. A key bit of this is this idea of coalition, because none of us can do this on our own. So it's a real call to arms for the industry and education to join up and do this together. And if you like, Youth Music is the funnel because we know exactly across the UK where this investment is needed. So the other important point we're saying is, you know, partners, industry bodies getting into this, you don't need to do it yourself. You really don't need to reinvent the wheel. No reinventions of wheels. We know the system, we know where it goes, and we do this together.
Which kind of, I guess, in the past, I've seen a few things where people have announced things that sound quite good. Like, we know we should be supporting X. Here's our announcement. We're supporting it. And like you say, they then have to go and do the whole thing from scratch when there might be someone who's got 25 years, to pick a number out of the air, doing it. So there's an argument there that I think will hit home.
Yeah, and you know, don't get me wrong. If an artist or a foundation sets themselves up and it's in their name, brilliant, and they deeply care about it. Don't get me wrong. But administratively and mechanically and funding-wise, you don't need to start a grant-making process again because, you know, we've been doing that for 25 years. And, you know, there'll still be acknowledgement about all these partners, but there's something with a certain amount of humility about working together. And, you know, that's quite challenging at times because the music industry working together strategically, you know, is a thing we want to get right. But, you know, as we said just a bit before, I think there's a momentum building now, which I'm excited about.
Yeah. And you mentioned artists, actually. I mean, this is one thing I've been noticing more is that there are a number of artists in the last year have used whatever platform they have, whether it's interviews, whether it's on the Brit Awards, where I think Miles Smith, Last Dinner Party, is that something that feels like a positive? Artists are sort of they're not scared of saying, actually, I've got a point that might be seen as political, but support this, support that. That seems like maybe not a change. Artists have always talked about this stuff, but right at the moment, artists seem to have, a lot of them are working up to the gravity of the situation facing the grassroots and are saying, yeah, actually, we did get our start there. We're going to get behind it. Is that something good for what you're doing, I guess?
Yeah, and then in some cases, artists then approach us because they want to do VIP guest list donations, like Fred again or Sam Fender. You know, a donation per ticket sold. You know, things like that. And we think there's much more to do. And there are other artists who would like to do that with us. And it was a definite theme at the Brits. I think there were several conversations, as you said, about the power of this. And the artist has that external platform. And then to take it to the next stage, talk to Youth Music. But, you know, we've literally got a list of where these places are that maybe are supported by Youth Music or indeed a part of the, you know, 83% that we've had to turn down. So we could actually work efficiently and at quite a pace to solve this situation. And it is relatively efficient. And I think, everyone's interested in efficiency. We don't need to be duplicating by all doing different grant making policies and grant making procedures for applicants who then have to do an evaluation per funding partners, if you see what I mean. So they'll
It's
be
a lot
doing
of form filling, isn't it? Yeah.
a lot of form filling, but actually the purpose of the work is kind of universal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this brings us to that. I mean, you put out a report in December, I think, wasn't it? The Industry Connect report. And I think that was about collaboration, but it wasn't just within the music industry. It was between music and education sectors, I think, which that seemed to, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not something I've read a lot about in the past. Like these seem to be completely separate sectors doing things. And sometimes there are links, but tell me about that. And that idea of collaboration.
And all too often there are not links. So there's a national plan for music education that has a section in there about join up with the industry. But at the moment, that join up's not really happening strategically. So we're in the middle of that space between education and industry. So I think the first thing is this idea about making it much clearer to young people, because it's pretty opaque, about what that route is into the music industry as an artist or as a technician or as a stage manager, whatever it might be. And if you're at school, you're talking to a careers person who doesn't fob you off, who with a couple of lines can tell you about the music industry. Now that might mean the school has to speak to one of the organisations we fund, but everyone is signposted. I think the second thing that came through was so many artists and so many people in the industry talk about mentors. I can talk about people who mentored me, but they probably didn't call themselves a mentor at the time, but they were definitely a mentor. I think getting much more consistent about giving young people mentors who know about the industry to help them. There was a third point about reimagining the music curriculum. So as I said, it's a statutory part of the curriculum, but interestingly, for a lot of young people, they see their lives in music as separate to the curriculum in school. So what I mean by that is if the curriculum really embraced their rapping, their producing, their love of music, the teacher working alongside the youth worker, you could reimagine what the curriculum looks like. And the last point was about a safe music industry, which, in terms of safeguarding, we're looking at that a lot because we're helping young people enter the industry. But I think working with like the MU, Music Guardians, young people are clear about, being safe and that they will be safe as they enter a job in the industry, for an industry that sometimes doesn't keep people safe. And I think that, again, is bridging that gap between where a young person has done education and now they're beginning to get into the world of work. And if you've already got that network, and maybe if you're from a family background that's quite privileged, you'll have those networks open to you. But we're really talking about those young people that don't have that, so that any interface they have with a job in music is safe and they're protected and they're looked after.
I've been covering the misogyny in music inquiry. And just some of the evidence given there. People talk about, I think partly because often there are points where you're alone. For example, in a studio with a producer, there are moments where you can be unsafe. There's a cultures, like it really did kind of lay a lot of that stuff bare. Where you thought, goodness, if you are a young person coming into this, I can understand how you would have those concerns, and you wouldn't know what to do if you encountered that. So it sounds like that's something that you're thinking really hard about as well, then.
Yeah, and we embed that in our grant-making principles. So your safeguarding policy and practice, we want to know about. So how do you operate and how do you protect, vulnerable young people, which is your responsibility as an organisation, and I guess honed in even more with something like the music industry, where for young people, if they get a break, that can sometimes mean they're vulnerable about not being looked after well, because they're so thrilled to have got in the industry that then they can be taken advantage of.
You're lucky to have this job is often the phrase I hear. You're lucky to have this job, so don't complain about anything.
Yeah, exactly. You're lucky that we've done this for you. And, back to the earlier point, you're lucky to be a musician. But actually, on and off stage, we're fundamentally about being safe. And the work with Music Guardians is looking at all that, and also with the MU as well. This all came out of Industry Connect. We talked to about 300 people, lots of organisations, and it was basically saying, Stuart, the system for the pathway for a young person to enter music is not working. It's too fragmented, it's too disparate, and it could be so much clearer, and it kind of starts in school and then onwards.
Yeah, and then let's say the people you would lose by it not being good is just a loss of talented people who
Exactly.
I mean, the report mentioned a national music strategy. I think you've mentioned this a couple of times in this conversation. And this is something I'm really fascinated by, because I've heard more people talking about it recently and saying we need to join up the things in government. We need to join up. And this idea of having a national music strategy seems to be... I remember I talked to, Tom Gray, who... He spent a lot of time talking about streaming economy. And then last time I interviewed him, he was like, actually, the thing I'm most interested in now is a national music strategy. I'm really focusing on that. And that was when my ears pricked up. I said, I wonder what this is and how it works. But it sounds like you also are thinking about this idea of joining up the dots.
Yeah, we'd be big, massive supporters and like to have a central role in it in terms of young people's lives in music, our bit of the ecosystem, if you like. It's like the without people, you're nothing, the Joe Strummer quote that, we're interested in those young people that they're safe, they're in careers, and we know about how that system works. So I guess that's join up with the Ivors, that's join up with UK Music, etc., etc. How it specifically looks is going to be the next stage, because there is a model, there's a national plan for music education, but it's very limited and driven by Department for Education. So it's very schools focused, but there is a framework that could then be utilised to create a kind of more overarching universal national music strategy. So it feels like key partners could be in that, setting some, ambitious and exciting aims and objectives for its first 3 to 5 years, and then an action plan underneath it, which is basically who's doing what. So it would require getting industry and education and all the kind of key bodies in a room together, which, could be a bit of a bun fight, but it has to be the place to start. Do you know what I mean?
And actually starting from a point where they all agree on something, which is this would be good. Whereas normally they'd be fighting over revenue shares or, contracts. They could maybe come together on this in another way.
And all that is like, vitally important stuff economically, financially. But this is about, the kind of social growth, as I've referred to, as much as the musical and economic growth. And putting those things to one side a minute to come together around young people and music in this country. I'm kind of excited about it. And there's others in the system as well, and other partner organisations who are too. A big job, but then we could be really punching above our weight, because I don't think the industry per se, as a collective, is doing that yet.
I mean, I'm often quite pessimistic about people thinking long term. Like, I think the last 10 years have ground it out of me, my optimism, like about politicians looking ahead of the next week, let alone the next year. But I don't. You have to comment on that. But like you say, I mean, youth music was set up by a politician, Chris Smith, and who was thinking ahead. And so that can happen. I know at the moment a lot of things seem to be, we need economic growth, quick, do everything for that, don't worry, everything, chop the trees down, runways, everything. But maybe there is a moment to say this is long-term thinking. If we do this, it will be good in 25 years' time, not just in a year.
Exactly. And I think what often works well for me is painting a picture together about what that could look like, and what would look different. So we've got something to get our head round, and then go and how we're going to get there, which has been the different phases of youth music. The vision mission has stayed pretty constant, but how we do it through political change, cost of living crisis, COVID, you have to be very agile. But I think giving that picture of what it could look like is probably the best place to start, which is like a perpetual, sustainable ecosystem funded by a combination of things, which I think the government would really, really love to see.
And in a weird way, I mean, I was thinking about the 41% figure of projects at risk of closure, but I didn't really think about the ones who didn't get funded. Is it 83%, you said? The ones who don't?
We're turning down.
And like that future where many more of those get funded, that's something that's, this isn't just about stopping the ones closing that are already here.
Yeah.
There's an exciting future in funding all those other ones that were really interesting, but just couldn't get the...
Exactly. And that's what I mean about the 10 million over time. This is a long-term approach, could be 40 million.
Yeah.
And yes, there will still be applicants who are unsuccessful because actually what they're proposing is maybe not in line with what we're trying to do, or there's something that's quite weak in the application about safeguarding, due diligence, governance, their financial model. So there'll still be organisations that get turned down. That's the nature of the beast, but certainly not to be at 83%, which we've never seen in our 25-year history. And I think partly this type of work in the system is more recognised, so there's more demand. But the urgent crisis is because of all this demand, because cost of living and financial cuts, youth service cuts over 50% over the last 10 years. That classic youth club where Ezra probably went, where English teacher would have gone. Laura Mavula came through youth music supported projects. Rizzle Kicks, Little Sims was in youth clubs. Celeste, all these people, and as you said, it's not the end in itself, but it does demonstrate the kind of power of this kind of grassroots youth music spaces and projects to help the whole. Yeah,
no, definitely. I mean, I was going to ask a final question of how optimistic you're feeling, but you kind of have answered that very well. But so maybe a slightly different twist on that is you talk to a lot of the people you're working with, the project leaders, the youth workers. I mean, how would you characterize how they're feeling? Because I guess to do that kind of work, you need to be optimistic about human beings. But equally, they're under this huge pressure. So what would you say, I guess, the mood is amongst, and I know it's hard to generalize a wide group here, but what sort of things are you getting back from the people you work with about how they're feeling about the future?
That's a really lovely way to look at it, actually. These are, the people working in this system, and a lot of the industry are good humans, do you know what I mean? And really want to make a difference. So what is a constant is that resilience and persistence and that focus on young people. Like what's making young people tick and understanding what they need to then inform what you then do. So I think that's a real strength of this system. It's not imposed on young people. It's with and for young people who across the nation and across the UK love music. So that passion never dwindles. I think there's a sense of exhaustion. Because it's a part of the system that, is suffering, and the high percentage at risk of closure. And I think wanting to feel acknowledged and understood in the system, and something like, youth music, who, fortunately people, talk a lot very positively about what we do. And I think see us as that spokesperson organization on behalf of these smaller organizations. So there's a meeting of minds, and I think they're looking to us to show that leadership to help make change. So the love of music and the passion for supporting young people just doesn't go. But I think there's this sort of general sense of exhaustion at the moment, and a big sense of hope that things will get better, but global events too, mixed in with UK events. It feels like a really tough time, Stuart. I don't know if you see what I mean. I
do. I know. I do. I think a lot of people are feeling it, that when something you're doing is tough, but everything around it, read the news or doom scroll your phone probably nowadays, it can make, I think exhausting is a good word for it, isn't it? I think people do feel they're not lost enthusiasm for what they're doing. They're just exhausted by pushing on.
Yeah, exactly. And want to feel that this system is being really listened to, and because it can be sometimes a bit forgotten in all the other noise that goes on. And what we've tried to do at Youth Music is power this infrastructure and keep it going as much as we possibly can. And, that means that the kind of consistency is youth music underneath all these organisations that supported those artists we talked about. But we probably need to like raise the profile of this to really be able to get into people's understanding that it's such a significant part of where it all starts.
No, definitely. Well, look, I mean, it's been great talking to you. And so Rescue the Roots will have launched by the time this goes out. So people can, I guess, can come and find out about it. So, I mean, we have a mixture of listeners. Like, you know, some listeners are in industry, some are just interested in it, music fans. But people can come to the site, find out about it and figure out how they can get involved, I guess.
Yeah, and we've got some great content, you know, going out about it, supported by artists. And Jordan Stevens has, you know, really got involved with it as well. And on a very pragmatic basis, if this is really resonating with you, you can donate. You know, you can donate to build this pot to do something more with at this really urgent time.
Well, grand. Well, look, best of luck with it, and hopefully we'll have you on again in the future talking about
that.
some of the things that have been funded by this campaign. So
I'd love that, Stuart. Thank you. Lovely
to talk to you.
You too.
So that was Matt. I think the thing I took away from that was, like you said, there is a crisis. There are projects that are going to lose their funding, projects not getting funded at all, but also optimism about the people involved, optimism about the idea there is a plan of how to kind of help them. And there's a campaign kicking off this week, which sounds brilliant. So I think, like a lot of the interviews I do with people who are working in this area, you can kind of sit there and get drowned in the, oh God, everything's terrible. Or you can look to the brightness ahead. And I think Matt put it very well, the reasons he's optimistic and the way he sees a path to do lots more of this good work. So thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please do subscribe to us in your podcast app. Give us a review and a rating because that helps it spread. And tell a couple of other people about it too, people you think be interested. If you've got a question you'd like answered on the show, we will be doing another questions episode soon. You can email us on thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. And finally, if you'd like to support the show, we have a Patreon page. You can go to patreon.com/thepriceofmusic to find out more about that. Next week, Steve will be back. I'll be asking him which bands he's seen at South by Southwest. And we'll be talking about news and what's going on in the industry. So for now, goodbye.